What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. We're going with my first look for week 2 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. So probably be more of a laid-back breakdown considering it's only Tuesday and there's obviously lots of information that'll come out throughout the week. But then on Saturday, I release my final thoughts video going everything in a more comprehensive way. And if you do enjoy today's video, make sure you like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and this is the most important position because it is going to dictate the rest of our lineup just off of one decision we make here at the beginning. Because if I am playing Jared Goff, I am playing some of his pass catchers to go with it. And potentially, if I like the entire game, which I do this week, it's the highest over under 51.5. Very excited for this game. I might just run it back for the overall game environment. You don't always have to do that, but that is something I will do in certain situations. I think that's a pretty good situation to do it in. Also, we know if we go with a more expensive quarterback, we're going to save at some of the skill positions, or if we go with a really cheap quarterback this week like Baker Mayfield, we might be able to fit in a CMC in addition to our stack. So it just completely gives us a direction for our lineup right off the bat. Now, just to get some cash game thoughts out of the way really quick, I'm just eyeballing it. I still have to run projections, run the models, all that fun stuff, and then look at some optos and check my ownership projections afterwards. That's why this is more of a laid back, just kind of first thoughts, just first thoughts. We're chilling, we're talking football, looking at some of these numbers here. I would say for cash games, probably just stick to guys that can use their legs. Last week, favorite cash quarterbacks were Jaden Daniels, Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, because they offer that high floor, high ceiling upside with what they can do with their legs. I mean, if you think about it, if we just get 40 yards on the ground, that's a passing touchdown, and that's a floor for a lot of these guys. And then obviously there's the probability percent chance of rushing touchdowns, which those guys did get that last week, and they all did pretty well. And it's just because they offer that really high floor, which is what you're chasing in cash games. So this weekend, Lamar Jackson sub 8K versus the Las Vegas Raiders with the 25.5 implied team total. The only concern is that they're nearly double-digit favorites at home, so the game gets out of hand. Lamar Jackson isn't going to have to scramble as much. They're just going to hand the ball off in the second half, so that is the one concern with that. But he is the most expensive, so it's probably the easiest to get away from him. Anthony Richardson, the price they come up this week, facing Green Bay. Don't love the game environment as much as last weekend. I think last week we had a 47.5 over-under. This one's currently at 40.5. They're also on the road, but he's still going to run the football. And there's always the chance for the rushing touchdown. So Anthony Richardson's still in play for me in cash games. Then Jaden Daniels, his price only came up about $500. He's facing the New York Giants. Not too concerned about that. 44 over under. And he absolutely killed it on the ground last week. Now, these numbers are obviously not sustainable. Had 88 rushing yards, 16 rushing attempts, and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's going to come down. I would assume, I have not seen any props out yet for his rushing, but it's probably going to be around 40 to 50 yards. But even then, that's pretty awesome for $6,200, and he'll be one of the better point per dollar options on the slate at quarterback. So for cash games, that's probably what I am looking at currently. And I would say the rest of these guys are probably better suited for tournaments. I think Patrick Mahomes is pretty cheap here at $7,000. We have a ton of options, and the Cincinnati Bengals defense is really not going to concern me this year. We're still at home in Arrowhead in the 4:25 p.m. time slot. 27-point implied team total. They are 6-point favorites. And we obviously do not have any confirmation on Hollywood Brown. And even if he does come back, I'm not sure if he's going to be limited. But even just getting him back is a big boost for Patrick Mahomes. So you're going to have Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, who is awesome with his limited opportunities on Thursday Night Football to open this season. Hollywood Brown, obviously, Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco. This offense is absolutely loaded. So $7,000 for Patrick Mahomes. Really easy to stack with him too, because the stacking options are not that expensive. I think I took a peek at tight ends, and Kelce was in the very low 6K range. I know he didn't go off on Thursday Night Football, but I like this spot a lot better versus Cincy. So love Mahomes stacks this week. However you want to do it, you can single stack, double stack with them. I don't really care. And if you do want to run it back, obviously good options over in Cincy. You have to assume Jamar Chase is going to get more going this weekend. Maybe T. Higgins will be back. So yeah, I love that game overall. 48-point over under, which is pretty high. It's just getting overshadowed by that Detroit and Tampa Bay game. And speaking of that game, Jared Goff versus Baker Mayfield. We're getting a playoff rematch in the divisional round, which was a great game. And I think this one's going to be great as well. We're at home in Detroit for Jared Goff. 51.5-point over under, 29.3 implied team total, which is the highest of the week. They are 7-point favorites, which I thought it would be a little bit closer, but I get it. Detroit is pretty OP at home and can certainly put up some points. Amon-Ra St. Brown, very weird game on Sunday night. Hard not to like this one overall. Great matchup versus Tampa Bay. Jaden Daniels just went off versus them. Now Jaden Daniels, completely different quarterback than Jared Goff. He's a statue, and he's not going to run the football. He actually averaged 1.7 rushing yards per game last year. But Tampa Bay was 27 versus quarterbacks on 270 passing yards through the air. No reason not to like Goff. Easy stacking options with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who should be able to bounce back. Even Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, one of the best tight ends in football. Sam Laporta, and then J-Mo as well. And then on the flip side of this game, we have Baker Mayfield, $500 cheaper. Great game versus the Washington Commanders. They were the worst defense in football last year versus quarterbacks, and pretty good matchup once again here for Baker. They allowed the third most points per game to the quarterback position. We're in a dome. Again, really easy stacking options here with Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. You could also look at K. Dotton and Rashad White, but those are more secondary options there. And then we also saw the rookie, Jalen McMillan, catch a really long touchdown too, which is sweet. So if you really need a cheap stacking option with him, he's also available. And then if we're trying to get even more different, because that game's obviously going to be popular just because based off the total. And Vegas is pretty good at their jobs, and they know when points are going to be scored. And yeah, most likely, outside of any crazy outcome, because anything is possible, there's probably points going to be scored in that game. But there is two pivots that I think are pretty interesting, and they're all very similar quarterbacks because Goff, Purdy, Stafford, Baker Mayfield aren't really the biggest rushing quarterbacks in the world. And if Baker and Jared Goff are going to get steamed just because of the game environment, I don't hate the pivots to Brock Purdy and Matthew Stafford. I know Brock Purdy was very disappointing on Monday Night Football. Jordan Mason, absolute nuke game. And obviously Deebo Samuel had a great game as well. Brandon Ayuk did drop a touchdown for Brock Purdy, so the numbers could have looked a little bit better. But if people are going to play CMC, assuming he is fully good to go and he's returned, he's below 9K, which I think is pretty cheap for CMC. Yes, with the assumption that people will play McCaffrey, the passing attack will probably get a bit overlooked, and he's only $6,100, and we know how efficient this passing offense can be. So if they're the ones that get the touchdowns this week, which I think they certainly can versus Minnesota secondary and their 26-point implied team total, we're in a dome, and obviously he has great weapons to get the ball to with George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel, averaging nearly 2 passing touchdowns per game last season, 270 passing yards and 9.2 yards per attempt. That's the thing. They don't really throw the football that much, but when they do, it's usually pretty efficient with how elite that Kyle Shanahan scheme is. So I love the pivot to Purdy in tournaments. Then Matthew Stafford, I know no Puka Nacua, but if you're looking for a really cheap stack this week, Matthew Stafford with Cooper Kupp, who I forget his price point off the top of my head, but I don't think it's that expensive. Pretty good spot here versus the Arizona Cardinals in what should be one of the more high-scoring games of the week at 49.5. That's higher than the Cincinnati Bengals and Kansas City Chiefs game. That's higher than the 49ers. And I do think Kyren Williams, who we'll talk about in a minute, will be extremely popular this week. So this is one way to get different off of it. All right, heading over to our first look build, if that's what you want to call it. Please don't copy this lineup, guys. Don't copy any lineup you see on YouTube, Twitter, whatever it may be. We are simply doing this for the process. It's supposed to be educational, maybe somewhat entertaining. If you think it's a really stupid lineup, you can laugh at me. I don't care. But what we're trying to do here, it's more for a single entry build. I do not play in million makers, and I've given my reasons on that before. But we need a quarterback here, and this is a single entry type build, and I think all the rushing quarterbacks make a ton of sense for cash games, but let's just go with a piece of this Detroit and Tampa game. Let's go with my boy Baker. And that price point's pretty much going to allow us to do whatever we want with our build, so I think we'll have a fun one coming up. All right, moving over to the running backs. Usually I call this pretty boring, but we got some of the fun ones in this one. CMC, Breece Hall. Kyren Williams is fortunately not just a punt returner, as everybody feared. And funny enough, he actually led every single offensive player last week. Every single player at offensive snaps at 67, played 90.5% of the snaps for the Los Angeles Rams. And Blake Corum did not play football on offense last week. I think he saw 9 special team snaps. So it was the Kyren Williams show. And if that's going to be the case this week, hard not to like him at $6,800. He gets the best matchup you can ask for running back, at least based off of last year. But looking at what Buffalo did to the Cardinals, it doesn't look like their defense is going to be too great this season. They allowed the most points to running backs last season. James Cook did pretty well, but then Josh Allen started cooking in the second half. But 120 rushing yards per game last year. And I mean, Kyren Williams, if he is going to play the bulk of the snaps, no Puka Nacua, just one man down less that can get the ball. So that does help everybody else in the offense, not named Puka Nacua. At $6,800, he is your cash game starting point at running back this week. Should be a high scoring game. No reason not to like Kyren. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they went on the road in Arizona last year with Kyren and just absolutely nuked when he came back from injury. Not that it means anything, but I just remember that. I think in my head. All right, up top, we have CMC. If he is fully good to go, 8,700 is a pretty good price point. Over on FanDuel at 10.3, kind of going to be tough to get there. Like I said, in tournaments, I like going with the passing attack just to get a bit different here, but obviously CMC, you really can't bet against him too often. You're playing cash games, obviously the safety is there, but after Jordan Mason's amazing game, maybe they ease CMC back into it, so there is a risk there. Breece Hall at $7,400. Him and Garrett Wilson are pretty much the entire offense. I know Allen Lazard went off at the end. They did have a free play where Aaron Rodgers threw an absolute dime to him down the seam, but at $7,400, I mean, if you're just looking for bulk volume, he's fine. Plus, he gets plenty involved in the passing game. If you're looking at last season's numbers, 5.6 targets per game, 16.7% target share, nearly 19 opportunities per game. They pretty much saw that last night, I guess, which is, yeah, it's Tuesday. So last night versus the 49ers. Isaiah Pacheco, So I really do like the passing attack here for the Kansas City Chiefs, but at the same time, very positive game script for him here. He's only $6,900, 27-point implied team total, 6-point favorite at home. Pretty much getting all the opportunities back there. Samaje Perine and Carson Steele really weren't involved. Going down to Derrick Henry, I'll be honest, I am never really huge on Derrick Henry almost any week, just because he is so touchdown reliant. And if you're not going to give me, especially on DraftKings, because if you're not going to give me any pass catching upside, it's just really hard to get there because I am just banking on touchdowns, and those are a lot less easy to project compared to other things. But this is potentially the perfect game script for him. 25.5 implied team total, 9.5 point spread in their favor, playing at home. If he can get us 15 carries on the ground, 15 plus, depending. I know the coach said they don't want to run him on the ground like they did at Tennessee, but if we can just get a couple of goal line touchdowns, I do not hate Derrick Henry in tournaments. Wouldn't go there in cash games because, again, his floor is very low. If he's not getting into the end zone, like 60 yards, then you're just getting 6 points unless he gets a catch. Like, I can get Jahmyr Gibbs for $100 cheaper, and we can get way more involved in the passing game. He's a lot more explosive, and also just a much higher implied team total. I know he's splitting with David Montgomery, but even then, just the pass catching upside just makes him so much more interesting to me over a guy like Derrick Henry. That's just the always concern with Henry. And then for the Detroit running backs, kind of the same old with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Montgomery's the bruiser, and Jahmyr Gibbs is like the sixth man coming off the bench where he's electric and he's very efficient. With his work, I believe he had around 17 fantasy points. David Montgomery was pretty solid as well, especially in the overtime drive. They just ran him down his throat, got into the end zone. They're 7-point favorites at home with the highest implied team total. Both these running backs are 100% in play. Rachaad White, same as always. We saw Bucky Irving involved last week, but I still think Rachaad White's going to be fine. He'll get targets, and the floor is pretty safe nonetheless. Now, Detroit, pretty good run defense, but with him getting so many dump-offs, potentially it does make him still viable at $6,300. Kenneth Walker, huge game last week, got over 100 yards, found the end zone. Kind of a nasty game here versus New England on the road, only a 38-point over-under, but they're still 3.5-point favorites. That if he can just get us 15-plus touches on the ground, it's going to be viable at $6,300. And then J.K. Dobbins didn't get a ton of work, but was very efficient with the work that he got. 10 carries, I believe he had 135 yards. And it's another good matchup here versus Carolina, who New Orleans just absolutely boat raced out of the game last weekend. And we also saw 3 targets for Dobbins, which was nice, and he did play 60% of the snaps, so $5,400. I mean, he is firmly in play if you need a punt running back. All right, moving over to the running back position, you need a couple of bodies here. Kyren Williams probably the first guy I'm going to plug in. Just love the matchup versus Arizona. He's pretty cheap, and if we're going to see a similar order to last weekend, he should be a lot more expensive than that. And then we could always play around with this at the end, but let's just plug in Breece Hall and move on to wide receiver. And I know we're here to talk DFS, but if you're also someone that likes sports betting, as it does go hand in hand, make sure to do it with Outlier, the sponsor of the show. They have all the data you need in one place to help make the best selections each and every single week on all of the games. They have all sports, but just to look at NFL and specifically this game in general, as it's going to be one of the most talked about games of the week, has all the insights, player matchups, injury reports, and all the data in one place that you would need. Especially for Baker Mayfield here. One thing I like to do is head over to the Insights tab, because I might be able to get some more information instead of looking at all the numbers and data. If you're trying to just get some quick hitters, we scroll down here, we can see that Baker Mayfield, he's exceeded 252 passing yards in 5 straight games versus bottom 10 defenses. And as we talked about earlier, Detroit has one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL since last season. And recently, as of 2 nights ago, they allowed Matthew Stafford to get over 300 passing yards, and that's with Puka Nacua being out as well. When you do find a prop you like, all you gotta do is click the button here because it'll give you the best odds possible. You go to your bet slip tab here, and then you can make the bet right there as long as they're a partner of Outlier. If you want to come in, try it out, you can get a free trial using the link down below in the description, and I know you'll love it. All right, moving over to our pass catchers. And like I always say, don't get intimidated. A lot of this just has to do with the quarterback that we played. So if you are playing Baker Mayfield this week, you should look directly towards Mike Evans at $7,500. Got 2 touchdowns last week. Baker loves him. And then also Chris Godwin down there is $6,000. If you were trying to save some money, we have Jalen McMillan down there. Got like a 30-yard touchdown, I believe. They're going to most likely be trailing 7-point dogs here, which is a good thing if you're playing the passing attack. So all 3 of those guys make sense. I wouldn't play all 3 with Baker, but you could play 2. Although last week, if you played all 3, I mean, it wouldn't have been the worst idea in the world, but not my favorite thing to do if you are playing Patrick Mahomes. You have plenty of options, whether it be Rashee Rice or Xavier Worthy. We'll see if Hollywood Brown plays. I'm not sure if I'd want to play him in DFS, but we'll see if he plays. Then we also have Travis Kelce, obviously. Like when you're stacking, it's not specifically just quarterback, wide receiver. It's quarterback, does he have a pass catching running back? Like with Baker, Rachaad White, he had plenty of targets last week. Or if you're playing Brock Purdy, you can also play him with CMC because they do correlate to a degree. Or if their tight end's good enough, you can correlate with them as well. It's not just specifically wide receiver, but if I say it like quarterback receiver, I do mean just all the pass catchers possible. If you are playing Brock Purdy, we are looking at guys like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and then I don't think really anyone will play Justin Jefferson this week versus San Francisco. So that's one way to get like really different in a tournament, just stacking that game up and playing Jefferson. Because if people are spending up at wide receiver this week, you'd have to assume it's probably Amon-Ra St. Brown, or it's going to be Cooper Kupp at $7,600. If you're playing cash games this week, Cooper Kupp probably makes the most sense of any wide receiver in cash games. Is he going to get 21 targets again? I would say unlikely, but you know what? You can't rule it out with Matthew Stafford because, man, he loves himself some Cooper Kupp. So at $7,600, Kupp is probably your absolute best expensive wide receiver option in cash games just because we know the targets are going to be there. We know Puka Nacua is going to be missing a few weeks, so it's basically the Kupp show. You also have Demarcus Robinson down here at 7 targets. Tyler Johnson just randomly got like 7 targets as well in that game at $3,300 this weekend, so he's also an option. I would say Demarcus Robinson is probably my favorite cheap wide receiver of the week, but Tyler Johnson will keep you a bit different. If you're playing Matthew Stafford, Stafford does not score points unless his pass catching options score points. So if you are playing Matthew Stafford, it would make no sense to not play some of these pass catchers. So please play Cooper Kupp with him, and if you want to double stack, take a shot on Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, and then outside of that, again, like I just said, it's pretty much just all stacking options. I didn't talk about Daniel Jones, obviously, but Malik Neighbors at $5,900. He's also really solid. I think mid-range cash option. We know how bad Washington is versus receivers. They got absolutely shredded last week. And while Daniel Jones isn't obviously the best quarterback out there, Malik Neighbors will still be heavily involved. He had 7 targets last week, 18.4% target share. But I mean, if we can get 7 targets versus Washington at $5,900 for Malik Neighbors' talent, I will take that. JMO in that Detroit game, obviously a fine tournament option. And I only have the Jacksonville guys on here because they're projecting well, given their price points. Like point per dollar wise, there's really not that any amazing cheap value plays. Demarcus Robinson projects really well. But these Jacksonville guys are popping a little bit. So not that I love the matchup versus Cleveland by any means, but they were projecting decent for the price points. And they are obviously, well, especially Brian Thomas. He's a pretty talented player. Got into the end zone last week, which was really nice. Out of a really good ball into the end zone by Trevor Lawrence. Outside of that, I think we pretty much talked about everything, and just everything's pretty much just stack based outside of a few guys. All right, moving over to the illustrious tight end position, man, it was really bad last week. So if you picked a bad tight end, it's probably not your fault. I mean, almost every tight end sucked last week, besides Isaiah Likely, and he wasn't even on the main slate. It was brutal. Jawan Johnson might have been tight end 1 last week on the main slate. Just absolutely disgusting. We have a few options here. A lot of it's basically just stack based, like George Kittle. If you're playing Brock Purdy, would make sense. That's the only way I'm playing George Kittle though. If I'm playing Lamar Jackson and you want to stack, you don't have to stack with a guy like Lamar. But Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, I know everyone would probably flock to Likely over Andrews based off of last week, but Mark Andrews was on the field. Let's not get it twisted. He was on the field. He was just getting not the best treatment from the defense. Let's just say that. But he played 52 snaps. Like, he was on the field, and I mean, Lamar Jackson's not just going to ghost him the rest of the season. So there is a chance where people are playing Likely. You could just play Andrews for 200 more, and there's always the chance that it sways more towards Andrews this week. Sam Laporta, if you're stacking that game up, yeah, but almost all these guys had just very pedestrian games overall. Travis Kelce caught 3 balls last week, but $6,200. He projects extremely well. Versus Cincy, they also give the most points to tight ends last year. The thing is, with the big dogs this week, they all pretty much had the best matchups you can ask for. Kelce gets the best matchup versus tight ends, and Laporta gets the second best versus the Buccaneers. Trey McBride gets the 5th best versus the Rams. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, elite talents, and they're in elite matchups. If you had the money for them, I really don't mind them this week. If you are dumpster diving, Kobe Parkinson for the Rams. I believe he had 5 targets last week, right around there. Had a handful, but $3,100. Like, if you are not playing some of the wide receivers, Parkinson is viable for a punt. Then Theo Johnson, good matchup versus Washington overall as a pass catcher. I know last year versus tight ends, they allowed the 7th fewest points. I don't really care. He's $2,600. He had a handful of targets last week. You're not asking for much. Just catch a few balls, and maybe, just maybe, he might fall into the end zone. All right, moving back over to our build here. I forgot to fill out the wide receivers after we talked about them, so we're just going to go full onslaught of filling out the rest of our lineup. We have just under $5,000. Let's just throw in a cheap defense really quick so we kind of know what money we have to work with. Saints versus the Cowboys. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but you know what? Let's just put them in there for now. I mean, you could cash last week with the Panthers defense. They gave up like 60 points, but you know what? It didn't matter sometimes. So, all right, wide receiver, $5,500 left after we plug in our random defense. Let's plug in Mike Evans because that's priority number 1 with Baker Mayfield. And then after that, I want to get 2 pass catchers with Baker. Thing is, we can play Godwin at what, $6,000, or we can play the rookie. I believe he is $3,600. Obviously, he's not nearly as reliable as Chris Godwin, at least as of right now. But we're going to plug him in, a little bit more fun, $3,600. So we still have right around $5,500 left, which is nice. So for tight end, I would like to get a run back option. I don't know if we could play Amon-Ra St. Brown, $8,100. I guess we probably could. I do know I want to play Demarcus Robinson this week because I want to get a piece of that pass catching core for the Los Angeles Rams. I know we already have Kyren Williams, but I don't mind doubling up on the Rams because we know the offense is at least somewhat concentrated on where the ball is going to flow. So if we plug in DeMarcus, that's $4,300 left for tight end. And to be honest, I don't really love the price range that leaves us. Obviously, you could leave money on the table. But if we switch this up, let's say we went with Sam Laporta down at tight end, then we'd have $6,100 left for the wide receiver position. That starts to feel a little bit better. We could get a piece of that Chiefs offense with Xavier Worthy. I don't want to triple stack with Baker, but obviously Godwin's an option. Malik Neighbors, who I like a lot. So that build feels a little bit better to me. So the overall roster construction of this looks pretty good. Again, don't copy and paste this, guys. We build it on the fly for educational purposes just to talk about it. But we have Baker stacked with Mike Evans and Jim McMillan. We're running it back with Sam Laporta. We have Kyren Williams and Breece Hall at running back, which I love. Demarcus Robinson in the flex. Saints defense is what it is. Just don't give up 60 points, I guess. And $6,100 leaves you a really good range of wide receivers there for your wide receiver 3 position. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys this week. Just a first look. I'll do my final look on Saturday morning, so be there to check it out. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you all next time.